As quickly as possible, we'd want to get rid of the income tax. We'd want to get rid of the Federal Reserve System. We'd want
Getting big government off the back of the little guy is the message Ron Paul preaches to students at colleges and high schools across the country. A former four-term congressman from Houston, Texas, Paul quit the Republican Party last year to run for president on the Libertarian ticket. While Paul is on the ballot in 46 states, he has few illusions about his chances of winning. Rather, he believes his campaign is laying the groundwork for future libertarians. Dr. Paul is 53 years old. He is a practicing physician, lives in Lake Jackson, Texas, and holds a bachelor's degree from Gettysburg College and his MD from Duke. Dr. Paul, thank you very much for joining us. Let's get right to the point. Now, you want to get rid of big government. You want to reduce the government in our lives. And you also want to cut out the income tax. Now, I know a lot of people against the income tax, but I don't think anybody that I know believes that you can really have a government this strong and pay for things here without that tax.
Oh, no, you can't. You can't have a government like this without an income tax, but we don't want a government like this. This is not the kind of government that was designed by our founders of the country. It's not what was written in the Constitution. We've only had an income tax since 1913. But if you want a welfare state, and if you want to police the world and pay for the defense of Japan and Germany, send foreign aid to the Soviet Union, you not only need the income tax, you need the Federal Reserve to print up the money when the deficit is accumulated. So we think the government should be much smaller. If government is small, then you don't need an income tax. The income tax only covers 38% of next year's budget.
Well, I mean, but you're also talking about eliminating the FBI, the CIA, some parts of national health care. I mean, how do you do that? I mean, do you just ride into town one day and say, okay, everybody leave who works for these agencies?
Well, the president doesn't do it. Obviously, we have to, that's why we talk to a lot of young people, because they're the ones who are paying these bills. They're the ones who are inheriting this debt. So it's most likely the young people who will move into this next generation in government will say, look, we can't afford it. We're broke. We better do something else. No, you can't do it with waving a magic wand, but we have a growing number of people in this country who are starting to realize that even if they might not agree with us on our moral principles and the Constitution, they might agree that economic law says we can't afford it any longer. I mean, we're running up $240 billion deficits per year. That's how fast the national debt is increasing. So the young people, there aren't enough young people to pay for this type of government. So the type of government we have today is coming to an end.
Okay, let me be clear now. Regardless of what you keep in terms of government, and regardless of how small, it still has to be paid for. How would it be paid for?
Well, the income tax only covers 38% of next year's budget.
Oh, okay.
So maybe you'd have a national sales tax. Maybe the states would raise the revenues. Maybe we would have so much tax per individual. Maybe there would be an import tax. There would be something other than the personal income tax. The personal income tax is the worst type of tax.
Okay, now you're a doctor. You've taken the Hippocratic Oath. From what I understand, you believe, though, about health care, you're going to leave out a lot of people, poor people, if we put your plan into action.
How do you know?
Who really need health care.
How do you know? That's a bad assumption as far as I'm concerned. There are 38 million people today that have no health care after the government's been in health care for 45 years. If you want to look at health care when government really controls it, go to the Indian reservations. Worst care in the world. Go to the VA hospitals. We spend a lot of money on health care, the government today. The price has gone up, the quality has gone down, the distribution has been eliminated. There are more people without health care now since the government's been in the business.
Okay, but what do you do to get better health care?
It's sort of like asking, how do you deliver bread to poor people? How do they get bread? They work and they go out and get it. Services and goods in a free society are delivered by the marketplace, but not by government. Now, if you think government is supposed to deliver all goods and services, you have to join a philosophy called welfarism or socialism. And we, of course, reject it for moral reasons, for humanitarian reasons. We believe the best distribution, the highest standard of living is done under a free market system.
Yeah, but there are some people who can't do for themselves. I mean, we got people out on the streets right now in this town, maybe 30,000 of them. What?
That's right. They're all a result of government. Government inflation, government deficits, government programs. So if you really want to help them... But doesn't government have a responsibility to come and take care of them? Personally, we do, yes, but I don't have the right to steal from you because somebody out in the street needs your help. You have an obligation personally to help them, but I don't have the right to interfere with your right to take something from you and deliver it to somebody out on the street. And you have to remember, There are more people on the street today without homes, without medical care since we've been in the business of welfare. So if we want to eliminate most of the people who are in need, you have a free market system. But the question is still legitimate because there'll still be some people who will have need. Our answer to that is it has to be taken care of through voluntary means, never through coercion, never through force.
You said we shouldn't be nearly as involved as we are in foreign affairs and support, defense support, military for our allies. Let me throw this. What if Mexico all of a sudden had unrest down there? We thought they were going to go communist. What would you do in your administration?
Well, the first thing I'd stop doing is sending them money. You know, they're broke. We just sent them this week $3.5 billion to bail out a government-owned oil company, which props up a socialist system. So I would say let's not prop them up. As we have bank failures here and the oil companies here in destitution, we continue to finance them. So I would say totally ignore them. If there's a threat to our national security, you never act secretly through the CIA or doing anything militarily without the consent of Congress. Congress is responsible to defend this country.
But what if the Soviets started sending the money if we didn't send the money? And
then the Soviet system would fall even more rapidly. They can't even feed themselves. We're financing the Soviet system, too.
You wouldn't worry about that as President of the United States?
Well, I would worry if they threatened my security and the security of the country. But I think it would be helpful to bankrupt the Soviet Union if they want to spend all their money, because they couldn't win in Afghanistan and they're broke, and now they're getting more loans from the Soviets.
But they could
from the United States.
They could put up a missile base over there across the border.
Well, they have one in Cuba.
I'm talking about in Mexico across the border.
Yeah, but they have one in Cuba 90 miles off our shore, and ever since Kennedy, all our presidents have agreed never to touch Castro. At the same time, they tell us we have to spend $300 billion a year stopping the spread of communism. So I would say that supporting and making sure Castro can exist is ignoring some hard, cold reality.
I've got a quick laundry list here. Try to answer these in just one sentence. Tell me what you would do in this case. Public schools, what should we do?
Well, I think we should give it some competition. I think we should immediately introduce competition through the voucher system or through tax credit so that we don't have a monopoly control of the public schools.
Social Security.
Social Security, the people should know the truth, that it's bankrupt and that young people won't get anything, and that therefore we should start to privatize it.
Death penalty.
Death penalty, I would support the death penalty.
What about Star Wars, SDI?
I think it's worth doing research on SDI, but I would take the money out of the money we spend overseas. 70% of our military money is spent overseas, subsidizing rich allies. It should be spent on the defense of this country, such as SDI.
Well, let me just ask you, do you know any place now or in the past where libertarian rule has worked, where the libertarian principles have been employed and worked?
Well, I would say that the most libertarian society probably was in the United States, and we've had the greatest prosperity than any country in the world. In the last 70 years, of course, we rejected libertarian views. Hong Kong, I think, is a pretty good example of what happens when you have a free market system.
We're out of time. Thanks a lot. And thanks to you for joining us to hear two of the other voices which seek to be heard in this important election year. Good night.
Do you think the death penalty is carried out justly in the United States? And do you want to see it continued during your presidency?
30 seconds, Congressman.
You know, over the years, I've held pretty rigid to all my beliefs, but I've changed my opinion about the death penalty. For federal purposes, I no longer believe in the death penalty. I believe it has been issued unjustly. If you're rich, you get away with it. If you're poor and you're from the inner city, you're more likely to be prosecuted and convicted. And today, with the DNA evidence, there's been too many mistakes, so I am now opposed to the federal death penalty.